All right, if you would, just turn to Hebrews chapter 2, and we're just going to spend about 5 minutes there considering Christ and Him crucified as we prepare to take communion. Hebrews chapter 2, and please read with me, beginning in verse 9. But we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. The first thing that we see here is that Jesus was made for a little while lower than the angels. The author of Hebrews has already labored in chapter 1 of this book to demonstrate the superiority of Christ over the angels. And I'm just going to sort of summarize briefly some of his argumentation. Jesus is the heir of all things, through whom all things were created. He upholds all things by the word of his power. The Father never said to an angel, "You are my son." The Father never told an angel to come and sit at my right hand. And the Father certainly never said of an angel, "Let all the angels of God worship him." This is only said of Jesus because he is far superior to angels. This is what makes the incarnation so astounding, that Jesus, who is very God of very God, would be brought lower than the angels. Once we know who Jesus is, we can begin to see just how significant the incarnation is. Jesus is preeminent. He is before all, he is above all, and yet he was made low, and all this was necessary in order to carry out God's purposes for our redemption. If you look back at verse 9, the end of verse 9, it says that Jesus tasted death for everyone. Now, this word taste doesn't mean he only got a small portion of death or a sort of a sampling or a nibble, but it means that he genuinely partook of death. He ate of it. That is, he experienced death in the realest sense. And notice, too, that Jesus' death wasn't incidental, but it was for everyone. Jesus was crucified on purpose, for a purpose. Jesus was made a man lower than the angels so that he could die as a man in place of mankind. The fact that Jesus is God did not make his suffering and death any less real. In order to redeem us, Jesus truly experienced death in our place as a man and for us. Now look with me to verse 14, where this is elaborated on even further. Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. I remember what we learn in Ephesians 2, that those who are dead in sin walk according to the prince of the power of the air, that is, the devil. And remember, too, Jesus' words to the Pharisees, that they were of their father, the devil, and carried out the desires of their father. Satan is the great deceiver, the chief rebel, and those who rebel against God do so under the sway of Satan. It was Satan who tempted Adam to sin, and this sin brought death. But Jesus' death frees us from the realm of death over which the devil presides, and brings us under his lordship into the realm of life, rendering the devil powerless so that we are no longer subject to slavery, living in fear of death, but we are set free and made alive. And then one last thing to point out from this section, and that is seen in verse 17, which reads, "Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people." Jesus, as our high priest, made the ultimate priestly sacrifice in his flesh. Each of us has sinned against God. Each of us rightly deserves his justice, which is his perfect wrath. But God, who is rich in mercy, sent Jesus to make propitiation, that is, to make satisfaction for our sin debt with God. And as we take communion, consider this fact, that it took no less than the shedding of innocent blood of a spotless lamb, the suffering and death of Jesus Christ our Lord, in order to rescue us from sin and death and to reconcile us to a holy God. All this Jesus did that he might bring many sons to glory. And because of the suffering of death, Jesus is crowned with glory and honor.